Hi, my name is Callie Wright, and I'm the Education Director at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. We're the nonprofit organization that in 1979 started the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund and worked to build the wall down on the National Mall. Today, I'm excited to be talking with my friend and Vietnam veteran, Nancy Wilson. Nancy, thank you so much for being here today. I want to start out by asking you about your service in Vietnam. I'd love to know what your job was and where you were.
Yeah, hi, Callie. It's nice to talk with you today. I was in the Navy from 1964 to 1969, and I was ended up as a lieutenant in the Nurse Corps in the Navy. I had my first duty station was in Newport, Rhode Island, where all of us go to learn how to salute and stuff, which I never did a very good job of, to be honest. But I did all of the basics, learning how to be an officer. It was not a long time. From there, I went to Great Lakes, Illinois, to the Naval Hospital. That was a huge facility, and the majority of the patients that we had in Great Lakes were result of Vietnam injuries. And I worked in orthopedics in that area. I really loved it and have, it wasn't just individual private rooms like you oftentimes have in hospitals now. We had 50 patient wards, and they were all just lined up, 4 rows of them. And that kept us busy for sure. From there, I did go to Vietnam. I landed in February 1968 and worked in orthopedics there, but I covered several different areas on the hospital on the level where I was. We had ear, nose, and throat injuries and problems. We had the urology and the burn unit whenever it was open. And then I also worked in the 2 Vietnamese women and children's wards, which were all on that same level. That was one thing that was a lot of fun because I got to play with the kids. That was a good break from all the things that we were seeing on a regular basis. But I'm really grateful that I had the chance to be in the Navy. I learned a lot, and I feel as if I did something worthwhile.
Nancy, can you tell me what was a typical day like for you serving as a nurse in Vietnam?
Well, no day was typical, was the trouble. We did have shifts like you have in nursing. We had 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7. But when we got off of at 3 o'clock, we oftentimes took a rotation and had the next 8 or 9 hours in the recovery room, especially if we had a full complement of patients on board. So that was, and it's 7 days a week. And there were a lot of patients. We had the highest count we had at one point was 1,000 patients on board. And that was during one of the big onslaughts in late May and June of 68. So everything kind of melded together, and you just kept going until you got things done.
What do you think were some of the challenges of being a nurse or being a woman serving in Vietnam?
I guess the challenge of that, the fact that I was a woman, I didn't experience some of the problems some women did. Some were really, especially when I was on the Repose, the hospital ship Repose, and we were moving constantly on the ship, but people in country, the nurses in country in Da Nang and out, in some of the more isolated areas, they did have problems because they were harassed by more of the brass, the upper officers, than it was the enlisted. The enlisted were just glad to have somebody take care of them. But probably being a relatively new graduate and not knowing some of the current things that were going on that were advancing nursing that we could have done there. We felt kind of like we were isolated in this area, and we do what we have right now and get them in, get them out was what we'd have to do.
Are there any days in particular that you'd be willing to share with us? Any particular memory from a day that really sticks with you even now?
There were two of them, actually. One involved a little Vietnamese boy. His name was Do Cu. He was 8 years old, and he was the cutest kid. He'd love to play with you. He'd love you sit and read. He didn't know what English was, but we'd try to figure out a story and read it to him and things like that. But he interacted with everybody. He had a massive heart defect called tetralogy FLO. They used to call them blue babies. And they sent him to the repose to see if it could be evaluated, if there's anything that they could do that would not fix all of it, but make it better for him and give him a better chance. However, they were doing a cardiac catheterization and he died during the procedure. That was hard, especially because the next day I took his mom into the room where we had him so she could say goodbye to her little boy. And we didn't know each other's languages, but I just hugged her and held her as she cried. That was something that I will never, ever forget. The other day that was of significance, I mentioned that I covered the burn unit if we ever had anybody in there. And one day there was a group of South Korean soldiers who had been in a personnel carrier that hit a landmine just after they had taken off, and it exploded in fire. We had 10 severely burned Korean patients. There was one who was a lieutenant. He was in charge of that group. And he told them that we were there to help them. They were to cooperate. They weren't to cause any problems and not yell out, nothing, just you tough it up. They did. And they were burned anywhere from 75 to 90% of their bodies. At that time, we used silver nitrate dressings on all of the wounds at their whole bodies, actually. And they were dressed twice a day. One of the hardest things we had was to be able to maintain the fluid, because with burns, you lose so much fluid because of the blisters. And they were so swollen, try to find a place where you could put an IV in. That was one thing. But after about a week, they were stable enough that all 10 of them were medevaced back to Korea. And I will, always wonder how they did when they got home. But that was having 10 that severely burned is something else.
Nancy, thank you so much for talking with me today. We spoke before about some young people that you met in Vietnam, but I also understand that you have a story about some young people that came into your life after the war was over. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share it with us.
Definitely. After Vietnam fell, I felt so strongly that I wanted to help a refugee. And I was living in California, and there was a large refugee area that they had down in San Diego. I went ahead and applied through Catholic Charities to sponsor. I said I'd like to have, 2 relatives, and these were 2 sisters there that we sponsored, the oldest and the youngest of 5 children. The oldest one was already an adult, and she, in fact, was a dentist and had studied with a dentist from Pittsburgh who set up a program for Western dental practices to teach to the people of Southeast Asia. That's how she had become a dentist. And the youngest one was Hien, was still in high school, and she lived with me until she finished high school. And they still, we get together whenever we can. I know Hien's parents didn't get out, their parents did not get out of Vietnam until 10 years after Vietnam fell. Her dad was sent to Hanoi for re-education, and they finally got to America. I got to meet them, and they just were a very, very pleasant couple. Their dad died several years ago, and Hien had her mom live with her the majority of the time, and she provided care for her mom. And as her mom's health was declining, Hien and I would talk at length of her feelings, what's going on, how things transpired. And I helped her through being able to tell her mom goodbye. And that's just, you don't have opportunities like that often in life, I don't think. And I think you need to really have the responsibility to share with people in a way that they need. They just really are great. And Hien became a pharmacist, and she married an American orthopedic surgeon who was in the Army. And then they traveled some with that. And Dow, the older one, married an American dentist and is up in Pittsburgh. So that's neat. And then the other little girl who I tried to adopt but was not able to, one of the patients who had been on the repose. She was my babe.
Nancy, also after the war, the wall was built and dedicated in 1982. Can you talk about the first time that you went and visited the wall?
It was at the time they had the anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Women's Vietnam Memorial, was the first opportunity that I had to go. And it was tremendous. And that's actually a place of healing that you feel, even though they're names of people who have not lived, for us who are still alive, I know there's some names on there of patients who I did work with, but later were sent back and then killed. But it's just a feeling that you feel close to the people who were listed on that wall. That's the only way I can describe it. You feel close to them.
Can you, I know you went out and you volunteered at the Wall That Heals, which is our traveling replica of the wall in Washington, D.C. Can you talk about that experience and what that was like for you?
Oh, the traveling wall was even more of an experience, I think, than it was to the MIG wall, because I could get closer to it. And at night, the way it is lighted, you can go in there after dark. And that, I can't remember or can't identify the specific feeling, but it was just wonderful. And I guess I went about 4 times while it was here in Garland last year. And it also is healing, definitely healing.
What do you think having the wall in your hometown provides that you might not get in DC?
The ability to get close to it, and because you are right there, even though you can get close to the wall in Washington, there's a difference in the closeness that you can feel when it's, that's my home. This is my home here, and this is close by. It was a very satisfying kind of a feeling to do that. And the individual Jules was the individual who was the staff person who accompanied it when I was there. She had tremendous information and made it even more of a reality by the things that she just talked with me about.
Students today, people today should know about the wall and about the war in Vietnam.
I think they need to know the truth and know the history of what went on. I don't think they may mention it in today's history books, but it's such a minimal amount that they really don't know what it is. They need to know that this is an area that it makes a difference when you will serve your country at this time in their lives, that they have a responsibility to help maintain the freedoms that they are enjoying now. And serving in the military is one way. If they don't want military, there are other ways that they can serve or they can volunteer to also have that, fulfill that responsibility.
Nancy, is there anything that I haven't talked with you about that you would like to share?
There was one name that I looked for, and I'm so happy that I did not find it. When I was in Great Lakes, there was a corpsman who was the epitome of what a corpsman should be. And I got to know this young man and his wife. They were just super people. His name was Terry Graymeyer. He was from Lima, Ohio, and they were sending him FMF. But this kid was 6'6", so he's going to be an instant target, is what you were afraid of. But when he would bend down to do a dressing change, it was like a gentle person. He was so gentle with everything he did, this great big guy, and had these gentle hands that demonstrated how he cared for what he was doing. And I know when he went FMF, and I have looked all over and he's not on it. So I'm glad that I did not find that one.
What drew you to nursing in the first place, even before you got to Vietnam?
When I was in high school, I worked with a doctor in the town where we lived. I worked there, did anything that I could. He taught me a lot. He took me to the little towns. We were in a small town. We went to the little towns where he would do surgeries because he was board certified in several areas. And it really piqued my interest. So I thought I was looking at hopefully becoming a pediatrician is what my goal was. And I needed to get a degree to start with. So I thought I'd start with nursing and go from that way. I'd applied at OU, and Oklahoma University did not have an accredited school of nursing yet. But Oklahoma Baptist University was accredited. It was the first baccalaureate program in the state of Oklahoma and has maintained an extremely high reputation ever since. When I went in for my interview to see if I could be accepted there, the directors, after talking with me, she said, I understand you want to be a pediatrician. She said, do you have an attitude of caring? You don't have a cutthroat attitude that you would need for medical school. And back at that time, for a woman to get into medical school was rare. And if they accepted you, you usually already had to have a master's and preferably a doctorate in something else before they would consider you for med school. And it was really cutthroat. So I went ahead and stayed in nursing, and glad that I listened to what she said, because I hope that I really have always maintained a caring attitude. That is the way I feel. And I hope that I portray that with whomever I interact. I worked, when I went to college, the Vietnam War was getting started and really ramping up. And I decided to go ahead and take part in the Navy nurse candidate program that they had. And I was sworn in I guess it was in the summer of 1964. Yeah, 64. And I was considered an E3, and I was under pay, under orders all the time I was in college. I'd have to get leave when I was actually going home, like it's Christmas break and things like that, and finished, and then with the obligation to serve active duty in the Navy. And it was the best thing I ever did, as far as I'm concerned. And that's how I got into doing what I'm doing now. I went ahead after I got home from Nam and got out of the Navy. I got my master's in psychiatric mental health nursing, because that's the only thing at the time that you could get a master's in nursing in. And then the next year went on to the family nurse practitioner program at the University of Kansas and was certified. That was probably about 3 or 4 years after the concept had even been started, and I functioned as a nurse practitioner and a registered nurse, which I still function as one in some capacities, although I'm not employed. But I retired finally a year and a half ago from nursing. So 54 years, I paid my dues.
Absolutely. Nancy, how do you feel that your service in Vietnam as a nurse affected your service back here stateside when you came home?
Oh, it definitely affected it. That set the whole parameter for who I am today, what I do, how I approach patients, and the willingness to learn and to work hard and to continue to always learn. I think that's one of the biggest things I got with that.
What are some of the challenges that you think that nurses may have faced when they came home from Vietnam?
All hell broke loose, because the best way to say it, we were vilified. They told us not to talk, not to wear our uniforms. And I pretty much isolated myself in a lot of ways. But if somebody found out I was from the Navy or had been in Vietnam, it was really a price to pay, because the names I was called, nobody should be called that. That's, and it's what they called all of the military. I was called a baby killer, right along with all the grunts who had their guns and all the ammo and all the weapons that they had. It didn't make any difference if you were in what position you were in. You were still said to be no good because you went.
Do you feel like you faced any professional discrimination in nursing because of your service?
I don't think I did, but I think in the recent time, when they found out I gave one of the talks they give at the 25th anniversary of the Women's Memorial, when tell your story, just a little short thing about what you did in Nam. And I told the faculty, the people I was working with, I told them what I was going to be doing, that they had selected me to do that. And everybody in the hospital, the day before I left, they all wore red poppies because it was on Veterans Day. everybody there. They had a big cake. They had all kinds of things as a send off. And that was really neat, that they did something and they did recognize it. But it wasn't at first because I just kept very quiet about it.
What should people know about what women contributed to the war effort in Vietnam?
I think the one thing that's very measurable is the fact there would have been a hell of a lot more names on that wall if we hadn't been there. That we did help get guys adequate care and be able to get home. And that's something that really needs to be acknowledged, that we did make a difference for a lot of people. True, there were a lot more men present than there were females, but what we did was essential. That was something that allowed, we helped, the corpsmen helped us, we helped the corpsmen. We worked with the physicians, and the physicians knew they could count on us. And that makes a huge difference. Most of the physicians, almost all of them, were really, really good guys. You had a, once in a while you get a real jerk, but that's stateside too.
How do you think the role of women has changed in the military since you served?
I think women are accepted much more for their ability. And you look at the variety of positions that women can now be utilized in different areas that they never were before. Those of us who were on the repose in the sanctuary were the only females at sea in the Navy until sometime in the 80s, when they started allowing women, one to be pilots, another to be at sea. And now it's pretty much open if they're qualified for whatever the area it is. I think that has opened up a lot more for them. But I think now, and it may be just the nature of the times that we're in, there's more open harassment. And it really reflects, I think, more society than it does military. But there was one part of it that I should have mentioned earlier, about the harassment you said and how the women were treated. One of the things that was really significant for us on the repose was the ship's captain. He would brown nose a lot of the brass that would be around the bases. Oh, Admiral so-and-so is going to be there. He's got to come to dinner. And he would have 4 or 5 senior officers from different branches to his quarters for dinner. And he would then assign a nurse to be assigned to each individual officer and entertaining for the evening at the, when they're, whatever it was. And then he would go want something on the base on land, and he would say, hey, I'll bring a couple of my nurses if I can get thus and so, a couple of my girls, as he called them. That was horrible. And we did not do this. Some of the pilots from the chopper pilots gave him the name, the Pimp of the Orient. And we understood what was going on, but he got mad because he thought we did, so he told us we could not leave the ship for a month. But that was just outright not the way it should be.
Nancy, one question that I want to ask is, how do you think the Vietnam War affected your generation?
I think it caused a lot of pain, for sure. And a lot of the people from my generation are bitter because they went to war, bitter because people were not supporting us when we came home. Um, just all over, not knowing how to readjust when they get home. Then they also were bitter because the politics that had perpetuated the war was you never knew which way to turn or what they were going to say. Oh, we'll do this. No, we do that. There was stress because we were not supported, but vilified when we went home. All of those things have caused tremendous amount of pain for Vietnam veterans, but also for all the citizens who were through that age group. You know, the young people who traveled through growth at that time. And nobody addressed really how they were feeling, why they felt the way they did. And it just caused more bitterness.
Nancy, I actually want to ask a follow-up question on that is, do you think that those traumas that people experienced when they came home kind of compounded maybe PTSD for men and women who had been serving?
Undoubtedly, it really did, and still does. That's one of the reasons, because now they're saying welcome home, but it's kind of hard 50 years later because there's still everything of the pain was internalized because like I said, we had to hide it. I didn't talk about Vietnam or even cry for 20 years after I got home. And the thing that opened up the show, China Beach, that was on, okay, the first episode of that came on, afterwards, I sat and cried for 2 hours. I just couldn't stop crying. We were on China Beach. So that I guess was the key that opened this up. And that was in December when that started. In January, I was asked to give a talk about nursing beyond the walls. It was an in-service they were having at Children's Hospital where I worked. That was the first time I had ever spoken about anything in Vietnam. And that really did help. And I know probably 2 or 3 years ago, my older son, who is, I guess he's 48 now, he said, Mom, you know, you have never talked to us about Vietnam. We don't know anything about it. And I said, I know, I couldn't talk. I said, nobody knew. And I said, I know that affected how I communicated. I made mistakes because of that, because I was afraid to let anybody know how I felt. So that made things rather uncomfortable. I did get a divorce. And I know that was part of it because I had never talked to my husband about it. So it really had an impact that has just kept rolling day after day after day.
Nancy, how do you think your life has kind of changed? You talked about how China Beach was an opening up point, but what were your growing points in terms of dealing with this PTSD?
I think one of the major things was being able to talk about it. I think that's one thing that if people, when they come back from a war situation, any kind of a stressful situation like that, need to be able to talk to somebody that understands. That's so important. And it's funny, one of the patients that I had at Great Lakes was injured. He was in the Navy, but he was in Italy, not in Vietnam. He was a jet mechanic. He fell from the top of the jet onto the concrete. and had tremendous damage to his leg. He was an artist, and I used to go by and watch the things that he would be developing, what he'd be doing, all kinds of beautiful art. And I told him, I said, I wish I could have one of your paintings or one of your pictures. And his mom sent me a picture that I have on my living room wall that he did and was on display in the Kansas City Art Gallery. And several years ago, probably about 6 years ago, after the internet and everything you could do with Google and stuff, I thought, I have his name. I know he was from Kansas City. I'll see if it's anything. Well, I Googled his name. It came up. I hit the telephone number. His wife answered, and I said, I don't know if I have the right person. I said who I was. I said I was looking for a gentleman who was a patient that I had in the Naval Hospital in 1966. And it got really quiet. And she said, that's David, that's here. We have gotten to know each other so well. They have been down to visit me, spend a long weekend. And we share so many things with that. And he said he has seen people come back from Nam that one of his cousin who had a lot of trouble with PTSD. And he told him, find somebody to talk to, find somebody to talk to. And he tells every veteran that now, even though he didn't have that, he sure as heck had reason to be bitter, but he's not. And that, I think, is some of the best advice. Find somebody to talk to, get this out.
We spoke before, Nancy, a little bit about PTSD and women who served in Vietnam, and how frequently that is something they're left out of that conversation. Can you speak a little bit to the issues of around PTSD and nursing?
The only thing you hear that we have heard for years was that PTSD was for the men. They were the ones who suffered. They were the ones who faced all of the hard situations, or wounds, whatever it was. That was what they had to deal with. And it didn't apply to us because we were women. And it wasn't until probably the last 10 years that I have heard anything about admitting that, oh, well, maybe women did have some problems with that. And there are a couple of groups, I don't know the total number of groups through VAs that have actually started groups for women for PTSD, or included the women in with the men, which either way, it's something they need to have access to because it's real, definitely real. But they haven't done any real documented studies like they did with men. There's a longitudinal study that was done by a group up in Seattle from the veterans, one of the veterans facilities in Seattle that I had participated in for a long time, and it dealt with mental health. That's the only thing that I have seen, and I haven't seen a final report from that.
Nancy, thank you so much for sharing some of these really important stories with me.